Welcome everyone today to this video on strategic planning for boards. This is part of a video series for Community Action Agency board members, and the objective of this video will be to help the board identify what they need to know, how do they find it out, and what does it all mean in relation to planning and setting the course for the agency. So our presenters for today, I am Courtney Kohler. I'm a Senior Associate for the National Community Action Partnership. We also have Dr. Barbara Mooney. She's the Director of the Association of Nationally Certified ROMA Trainers and Implementers, also a Learning Community Subject Matter Expert for the Community Action Partnership. We also have Frederick Richmond. He's the Vice President of the Association of Nationally Certified ROMA Trainers and Implementers, and also the President of the Center for Applied Management Practices. So this presentation, as I mentioned, is a part of a series that's intended for Community Action Agency board members interested in a deeper understanding of how to help the Community Action Agency increase its capacity and results, how to meet and exceed the organizational standards, and how to make sure that all of these pieces of the ROMA cycle are integrated and working well together. So you can see the different pieces of this video series here on your screen. And these can be accessed and used as board training either in a series or as standalone. So we're going to be exploring planning today as the part of the ROMA cycle that uses the agency mission statement and assessment data to identify results and strategies. So this also relates to Organizational Standards Category 6, which is all about strategic planning. And establishing the vision for a community action agency is a big task, and setting the course to reach it through the strategic plan is serious business. The community services block grant eligible entities take on this task by looking at both internal functioning at the community action agency's local needs, and an efficient organization knows where it is headed, how the board and staff fit into that future, and how it will measure its success in achieving what it has set out to do. This agency-wide process is board-led and it's ongoing. So it should be a living and breathing strategic plan with measurable outcomes instead of the plan being written and sitting on the shelf to become stagnant. Often, the plan is set with ambitious vision, and the strategic plan really sets the tone for staff and board and key leadership and management to use it as a tool for the organization. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Fred Richmond to talk more about what is planning.
Thank you for that excellent introduction, Courtney. So let's take a look at what is planning. In the previous slide, we looked at the ROMA cycle, and planning is that second step in that circular process. So when we plan, what is planning is essentially thinking, considering different things before the action takes place. We want to think about what we want to accomplish and how we organize our activities to make that happen. And we want to assure that the Community Action Agency provides the services and strategies that address the local needs that were identified in the previous community needs assessment. During this process, the board needs to consider many things. One is the results of the assessments, essentially that identify and prioritize needs. We also need to look at the availability of resources that are already at our disposal, as well as resources that we may have to secure in order to address the plans and the needs of people or build it into the plan. And lastly, we need to tie this back into the mission. If the agency has a theory of change, that mission is clear and sets a direction. So essentially, all this information that the board pulls together identifies the agency goals and, frankly, how you plan to achieve them. So let's look at the next slide. The act of planning provides an opportunity, essentially, for the agency to step away from their daily activities and consider where you want to be in your future. Typically, we set a goal of 3 to 5 years, and we put a focus on how our agency will address its prime mission, that of anti-poverty, eliminating or ameliorating the results of poverty. And a well-thought-out plan helps to bring together the agency staff, board members, around a common vision. Planning is intuitive to us. Essentially, as human beings, we make decisions all the time. We make connections about what we do. We are constantly making choices, what goals we want to reach in life. We change priorities depending on ourselves and the environment. So we can think of ourselves in general as having a life plan. In today's culture, especially moving forward, agencies have accepted the fact that we need to focus on results. And community action needs to identify the results for the clients, how well these results are achieved, which is performance, and that sets the basis for accountability for community action and other federally funded programs that may be part of the 8 programs and services available and administered by the agency. It is clear that the plan must come off of the mission, and that gives us a clear and comprehensive view of the community that we operate in. And essentially, once that's done, the next step is the plan that identifies the results. Essentially, we plan for results based on that initial assessment. The other issue, which we know, is in 1998, with the CSB reauthorization, it was also a mandate. So, in fact, it is a requirement, and it is a smart requirement, because for community action agencies, that is essential to their success and well-being. So what that plan does is it includes the assessments, an assessment of the agency's resources, why we do this, and also at the end of the day, the plan helps us identify what improvements we want to make and the results we want to achieve. Let's take a look at the next slide. We tend to think of different kinds of plans, and you can see from the graphic in there, we have what we call the community action plan that typically is a smaller focus on how the agency uses its CSBG funds. We also, as we know, agencies are multi-purpose. We also plan for submitting applications or proposals to other funding sources. That is kind of a plan as well. And essentially, the org standards, which have essentially front and center, the org standards cite a special kind of plan, what we call an agency-wide strategic plan. And let's take a look at the next. And the community needs assessment flow through these different plans, especially the strategic plan. So the question is, what is the purpose of strategic planning? And essentially, strategic, we interpret, means comprehensive and agency-wide, a broad view of what's going on, essentially the big picture. And the strategic plan documents the results from the board's agency-wide planning process. The strategic plan emanates from the board. That is the direction. It includes the goals, the actions, the means of measuring achievement or progress towards goals. And the strategic plan sets out the elements needed for efficient and effective work that everyone in the agency and all of its partners, remember, we do not work in isolation, we work in partnership with other community-based organizations. So essentially, in a healthy strategic planning process, everyone is involved, the employees, the partners to the agency, and the board. Let's move on. So if we talk about an agency-wide strategic plan, we are talking about how we want to focus that. We can focus it on agency, family, and community planning and other documents. And we also need to integrate the community needs assessment. That identifies the population that we serve, the population at the moment, what the population could be going forward, and that helps sets the direction for the goals and objectives and meeting the identified needs of the population. So we talk about action planning. We talk about how the board policies to be carried out, and that is the work of the staff of the agency. What does make a difference, and it's important, is if the agency has developed a local theory of change. That can help with development of a strategic plan as the agency has already identified agency-wide goals and thought about how all of these should work together. It is the big picture, and that is very important. If an agency hasn't yet developed a local theory of change, we still need to think about the vision, the mission, the values, but of course the expectation is the theory of change will help facilitate that process. At the end of the day, the strategic plan is based on the agency's own understanding of who they are and how they want to get there. Let's take a look at the next. So let's go back to our board, the board responsibilities. Essentially, the board is required to approve the plan and participate in the process and to ensure that it is agency-wide. And then the board is responsible for hitting those key elements of the mission: reduction of poverty, how the Community Action Agency works to revitalize low-income communities, and essentially empowering low-income people to become self-sufficient, become their own advocates. There are 2 organizational standards that specifically address this. Standard 6.1 essentially says that in no greater than 5 years, the board has to review and essentially create a strategic plan. 5 years is a long time. There is nothing wrong about doing something in less time. And essentially, the second one is the standard 6.2, is it the approval of the plan. So essentially is one doing the plan, 6.1, 6.2 is approving. And basically making sure that, again, what I said, reduction of poverty, revitalization of low-income communities, the empowerment of people to become self-sufficient. That is the end point of that strategic plan. Let's take a look at the next. Another way to think about roles, and this is our friend and colleague, Peter Drucker. He breaks it into two parts. So essentially, the board is responsible for developing and managing a plan, and that is certifying off and essentially acknowledging what the mission goals and the allocation of resources are to achieve the results, and also appraising progress and achievement. As Courtney said earlier, this is not a document that sits on a shelf. This is a living, breathing document. Management, and this is the agency staff and the executive staff, as well as anyone else participating in the process, essentially to identify the specific objectives, the action steps, and tying that to the budget. This has to be done in concert with the availability of resources. Resources could be program services, but also dollars. And at the end of the day, we want to identify what is effective performance, what are those benchmarks, and how we're going to measure and report it. So look at the next one. Organizing a planning committee. In a board of directors, one of the standing committees that is essential is a planning committee. And this is very straightforward. We need to identify the committee. We need to identify the committee chair, which is usually a board member. We need to have a timeline for the strategic planning process, specific dates. Some agencies have board retreats or other planning events. And we also have to discuss with others about who may support that process. This is certainly within the purview of ROMA trainers and ROMA implementers, program managers, consultants, and any other stakeholders that are part of that process. So essentially, it needs to be well organized, has to have leadership, and pick up all of these attributes for a successful planning committee. Let's take a look at the next. What's important is, again, we need to look at the last year's plan and progress. In other words, if this is a 3 to 5 year plan, if the agency is doing the implementation correctly, it will have collected data, achieved certain goals, looked at results, and essentially going back to see to what extent these were done. Was progress made towards meeting last year's goals? What goals are still relevant? In other words, you may still do that. There may be new ones you want to add. Again, Organization Standard 6.5 essentially requires that the governing body, the board, will document and review at least every 12 months. So that is the standard. So essentially, again, to review this, the board must think what goals were not met, consider why progress may not have happened, if that indeed is the case. And lastly, is there any additional work to do? So essentially, is reiterating, this is a dynamic, breathing, living document. Let's take a look at the next page. Let's talk about fiscal issues and agency needs. I think everyone understands today the interrelationship between budget, costs, and services, et cetera. So essentially, fiscal data needs to be transparent and needs to be available to the board, and essentially being realistic about either what's available or what could be accessed. We need to show the cost of providing services, the output data, and connect it to the outcomes, essentially looking at the relationship between costs and results. And lastly, we need to be realistic about the budget. The budget has to be realistic within the context of the strategic plan. There are organizational standards that do this. Standard 8.1 deals with our organization's annual audit by a certified public accountant. These can certainly be looked up. Standard 8.2 essentially says comparing the audit, looked at the previous year's audit and seeing the comparison between the two. And then there are separate org standards for private and public community action agencies that deal with how the governing board or the board of directors reviews the statements, the balance sheets, et cetera. So I want to turn this over to Barbara to continue the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Courtney and Fred, for setting the stage for our process. I'm going to be talking a little bit about the plan's structure. Once you have put your plan together, you want to be able to package it in a way that makes sense to a reader. And so agencies organize these plans in many different ways, but they could be organized by the national goals, by different domains, like housing and employment and so on. They could be organized by levels of need, the needs of the family, the need of the community, the need of the agency. Geographic area is another way where you see if you have multiple areas in a service area that you want to focus on. You need different needs in different areas. You can organize your data in those ways. Perhaps about the target population that you might be looking at, young people or senior citizens. Different populations are one good way to sort your data. And then agency departments or programs. But however you organize the data, you need to present it then. And a key part of that presentation is the executive summary. Particularly for the board's review, there should be a brief summary of the larger plan that talks about the key elements that is easy to talk about and easy to understand. And the full plan should include the purpose, the process, the stakeholders, some information about how the plan was put together, the needs and the prioritization of the needs, the goals and the expected outcomes, and also the services and strategies that are put into action. It's important that we are able to see all of those different elements in the strategic plan. Fred mentioned the theory of change, and this is one example of a local agency theory of change where the different paint-colored tubes are different programs, and each of those programs has its own outcomes and probably its own plan. What's important to you as the board is to be able to look at that big picture. What is the impact of your agency? And that's in this graphic at the top of the page, that families move out of poverty. That's the overall outcome expressed by this. So you need to be thinking of your strategic plan as a way to demonstrate the interconnectedness of all of the pieces of your agency. And before you finalize your plan, this is an opportunity for you to look back to say, are the needs that were identified in the agency's community needs assessment referenced in this planning process? Were there needs that the agency is not going to directly address, but they're still mentioned because they surfaced as a need when the assessment was done? Do the goals that are projected really talk specifically about changes? What is going to be improved in the lives of individuals and families? What is going to change in the community? And do those outcomes really match the identified needs? Are there services? Are there strategies, objectives that really connect the needs to the achievement of the outcomes? And do the strategies proposed match the level of need that was identified? And then does the plan include how progress will be tracked and measured so that we know if we are being successful? There are a couple of things that we're asking you to take action about. Are you going to improve the plan and record that action of the board? That's one of the things that you're to do for the organizational standards. Are you going to identify action steps that include assignments? Sometimes those action steps are part of the plan, and sometimes they're the next thing that happens after the plan is approved. Are you making recommendations in regard to how this plan is going to be used to actually implement services and strategies. And is there a timeline for review? This is an important piece for you to assure that you are able to know when you're going to review the plan throughout the next year to see if you're moving forward to success. So Courtney is going to end our presentation.
All right. Well, thank you, Barbara and Fred, for that presentation on planning today. And thank you, local Community Action Agency board members, for your time and service to community action. We hope you learned something from this video and encourage you to check out the other modules within this series. We also have additional resources on our website at www.communityactionpartnership.com in our resource library. So thank you all for your time today. Goodbye.